Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Country Education Partnership Pre-Professional Development Summer Series. My name is Brendan Ryan. In the spirit of reconciliation, the Country Education Partnership acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Victoria and Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. So welcome everybody to the second in a three-part series which focuses on student welfare. Today's topic, abuse awareness, identifying the signs of grooming and abuse. And I now hand over to the Chief Executive Officer of CEP, Mark McVee, who will provide us with a CEP update.
Thank you, Brendan. I just thought it timely to just share with people some of the varied work that CEP do. So we had a meeting this week with Women's Health Grampians, and specifically the core unit, which is the Community Respect and Equality program, with a real their strategic focus is on the prevention of violence against women. And they do a lot of work through Victorian schools through the Respectful Relationships program. But our conversations were around how do we get more rural schools involved and access to programs, and almost sort of be a bit of a champion for rural schools, or look to form clusters and bring them together, do some in-kind work there. So that's sort of just some of the things we do and some of the networks we make to try and get increased and improved services to rural schools and really be that voice whenever we can. So I just thought that was an important thing to share with people, the varied components of our organisation. Thank you. Back to you, Brendan.
Thanks, Mark. As usual, the normal housekeeping will apply. It is a 1-hour session, so we'll conclude by 5 p.m. The program is being recorded, so there will be an opportunity to view the session at your own leisure, and all past sessions are available online. If you have a question, please include that in the chat box, and I think we may have already received some questions for today's session, so we'll cover those as well as any that appear in the chat box. And a reminder to everybody that there will be a survey before the end of the session. Please complete the survey before you sign off today. So now I'll hand over to CEP Manager Morris Billy, who will once again introduce our presentation.
Thanks, Brendan, and welcome everyone if you're first time to this series, or welcome back if you were part of Series 1, Part 1 last week. Lots of fantastic feedback, so it's fantastic to have Kristi back on board, and also thanks to Tess, who took the hosting chair last week and did a great job in that space as well. So more for new arrivals into this week's session. We are obviously delighted to have Kristi McVee back, and for those that don't know, Kristi's an ex-police officer, child abuse detective and specialist child interviewer. She's got a wide range and breadth of knowledge and background, and she's also the author of Operation Kids Safe, Detective's Guide to Child Abuse Prevention. And I think that leads us into today's session and what we've particularly going to cover around child abuse awareness and identifying the signs of grooming and abuse. But Kristi, as I welcome you back, and thank you for joining us again this week. We're in the middle of our 3-part series. Welcome back, and I think you might like to just give us a bit of a recap on what happened last week for those who may have missed it, or those who have lived really busy lives and are looking for a recap. So over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much again for having me. Yeah, so last week we were talking about online safety, online child exploitation, and just basically checking in with what it looks like today. You know, when we say online child exploitation, sometimes we think that it's a certain thing, and it can be multiple things. And we talked about the different types: online grooming, sextortion, coerced or self-produced online child material. And we also talked about the motivations behind the different types of predators, you know, whether they were predatory or pedophilic, have attraction to children, and then also whether it was money or financial motivations and how they lure kids in and those sorts of things. So it was a pretty good session. I think it's worth, knowing these things, especially from an education standpoint, because whilst our kids are talking about the different gaming platforms and the social media platforms and what they're dealing with online, if we're not aware of what actual groomers do to target kids, then we're kind of missing part of the conversation. We might not actually pick up on the signs. So I think that's a really cool thing. So we're going to talk about today, and I'm just going to share my screen. We're going to talk today about child abuse, child sexual abuse material, and of course, why has it done that now? So we're going to talk about child sexual abuse and online, and from that point, we are also going to be talking about how does that grooming look like, what kind of motivations and things that we see. Sorry, I'm just going to press present. Yeah, so for anyone who wasn't here last week, I'll give a quick recap. I was a police officer with the West Australian Police for 10 years. Whilst I was in the police, my daughter was only 2 years old when I joined, 3 years old when I became a specialist child interviewer. I worked and have lived in regional Western Australia my whole life. I live in a regional centre now. And so I know what small community and communities are like, what happens in small community, and how they have very amazing community-minded people and individuals involved, but also that there is some risk factors and things that being in a community you actually miss out on. And I think that's what CEP is, why they wanted to present this information to you, so that you had the information that you might get elsewhere as well. When I left the police in 2020, after 10 years, I actually realized that a lot of people don't know the stuff that I knew through my experience. I mean, I heard it all the time from parents. I just wish I knew what to watch out for. If I had have known what red flags and warning signs, I might have known. I can't, most of the time they're like, how did this happen? And that's why I wrote the book about it. It's when I left the police, I didn't actually think I was going to become a child safety expert. I thought I was going to become a personal trainer. And here I am nearly 6 years down the track after leaving, and considered a child safety expert. And I talk about this day in, day out. So I think that's
Chris,
one of...
You might just be sharing the wrong screen, Kristi. Sorry.
Yeah, we're just looking at your email.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. You don't want to look at my emails. Thank you.
Well, it's from us, so it's okay.
Yeah, it's okay. It's all about...
well, that's good, because imagine that. Not that I get really boring emails. Thank you, because that really is annoying.
It's okay. I think you just said that Maddie sends you boring emails. So I'm Maddie.
Sorry, Maddie. Not you, everyone else.
Thank you.
All right.
Is that working now?
Not yet.
Now we're back to not sharing. Yeah.
Oh my goodness, what is going on? We tested this. Sorry, we tested this before we started.
We'll just blame the wind, the high wind in Victoria. We'll blame that.
You blame the wind? Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
Let's see. Also share system audio. Yes. Share. Allow. Goodness me. We did this before we started.
Yeah, we're good.
We're good.
Have you got it?
Yep.
Oh, phew.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on, because I know I've got a short amount of time. So yeah, I wrote a book about it. There's going to be a content warning, because obviously we're talking about child sexual abuse. Please, if anyone needs to have a chat about anything in particular afterwards, I'm more than willing to, take emails and try and assist where I can. Obviously, talk to your EAPs and your support networks and CEP if you need to, because some of the stats and some of the information is quite concerning. Is that on your full screen, guys? I just want to double check.
All good.
Okay, cool. All right. So if for anyone who hasn't heard of the Australian Child Maltreatment Study, it was released in 2023. It was groundbreaking study because it's the first one done in Australia in a long time. The research that we used to have was at least 20, 30 years old. Back then, it was 1 in 3 girls and 1 in 7 boys. Now we have the national statistics are 1 in 3 girls and 1 in 5 boys will be sexually abused before they reach 18. So although it's like we all of us in this space, we're like, yes, we've got new stats. Obviously, it's not great that, 1 in 5 boys will be sexually abused. It works out to be 1 in 4 children total. So when we look at that, it actually is quite concerning. And I think that why I was excited about this data is because it means that everything I knew and I was sharing with the people that I was trying to tell people that it's actually more than what we think it is. It's probably more than this in actuality. We've now got the research that shows it. Now, 1 in 4 Australians, so around 28.5% of adult Australians, have actually been sexually abused, adults that are walking around in Australia. 1 in 4 Australians has also experienced more than one type of child sexual abuse. So we classified child sexual abuse between contact offending and non-contact offending. And we just know that from this research, which I highly recommend if you're helping children in this space to get an idea of what they're dealing with. We know that it happens more than once for over 78% of kids. It happens more than once. For 11% of children in that, it happens more than 50 times. We know that kids are being abused in the home, and and like I said, 28.5% of adult Australians, over 1 in 4 adult Australians walking around, and people on this call, people that we deal with every day, parents that we deal with, they've been sexually abused. So that also has a big impact on how they respond to child sexual abuse and how it impacts how we support kids when they tell us about child sexual abuse. There's so many factors to that. We also know that over 90% of all child sexual abuse is by someone known to the child. We're talking about 47% is a family member when it comes to female victims, over 47% of it. As you can see in those stats from the Australian Bureau of Statistics, for girl children victims, 25% is by a non-immediate adult male relative. So we're talking uncles, grandparents, cousins. 16% by a father or stepfather, 5.6% by a brother or stepbrother. Child-on-child abuse or sibling sexual abuse is also a massive factor in these cases. And then we know that for our girls, over 49%, it happens before around 5 or even earlier. Sometimes people can't remember, and only 84% ever tell police. So it can be quite devastating for a female victim, and same with men. Unfortunately, men don't tell, and we know this because of the research, but and because of the Royal Commission into Institutionalised Child Sexual Abuse. Men, they're more likely to be abused in teenage years, possibly by another peer or by an adult. And we know that from the the Royal Commission into Institutionalised Child Sexual Abuse, we know that on average people take 24 years to disclose to anyone, and 30 years for men, and 99% of men never tell police. So why does this all matter is because the child maltreatment study for us, when someone's being abused in the home or abused behind, somewhere in their neighborhood or in their communities, kids that we're dealing with in our schools, we know that they're going to have almost 3 times more likely to have a mental disorder, PTSD, alcohol and abuse, alcohol abuse or alcohol. The stats also show some cannabis, higher use of cannabis, depression. But when I was investigating these cases, I would be, going into prisons and talking to adult victims who had been abused as children, and, their whole life trajectory was changed by what had happened to them as a child, by their abuse as a child. A lot of the times, they might have been a really decent student, and then they become really, depressed, angry, with all good reason, and no one picked up on their abuse, and no one stepped in. So their whole life changed. They had substance abuse, and went down that pathway of crime. So we know that if our kids don't get the support early on for child sexual abuse, that they have a higher risk of all of these things, and any kind of mental distress. We also know that from research, and this research came out in 2023, a victim of child sexual abuse has a 8.25 times higher risk of dying in middle age. So heart attacks, strokes, there's a 12.6 times higher risk of suicide, and 5.92 times higher risk of circulatory and respiratory diseases and cancers. So the fact is that if we don't pick up child sexual abuse early enough, if we don't intervene, if we don't support young people when they are abused, it is going to affect their whole life. It affects their health, their mental health, and their potential, potential everything. And I mentioned this last week during the presentation when we got onto, porn and stuff like that, but we know that nearly 50% of child sexual abuse is by another child. Now, some people are probably thinking the math ain't mathing, but what it is that most children aren't just abused by one perpetrator in their childhood or in their lives. They will have multiple abusers over the period of their lifetime. So it can start off with maybe an adult abusing them, and it could end up with another child abusing them or harming them. And in Australia, we try to use the terminology harmful sexualized behaviours, a child harming another child. We don't necessarily use the term perpetrator or offender when it comes to children harming children. So, the thing is that if we're not stepping in when we see a child displaying harmful sexualized behaviours or a child showing signs of abuse, then the potential for them to go on and harm another child is quite high. And we see that as in victims as young as 2 and 3 years old in childcare centres and in our schools. And unfortunately, I think the research that Australian Child Maltreatment Study research, and with everything going on in the media about early childhood education, what we're finding is that people are all up in arms, which is very, it's very warranted. But the research shows that only 2% of child sexual abuse actually happens in early childhood education and 0.7% happens in school. So although it is still something that we really need to be mindful of and pay attention to, and if children are showing or displaying harmful sexualized behaviours or inappropriate behaviours, we need to cut it out and nip it in the butt straight away, because those sorts of behaviours actually, they're like a virus, they spread. So what we need to do is make sure that we're pulling them up where they can and investigating why kids are displaying some of these behaviours, because they spread around, and then it could be happening in the home. And I did mention last week when I was first investigating and interviewing kids about this stuff, when we saw a child in 2010 display harmful sexualized behaviours and harming other children, we naturally assumed that they had been sexually abused in the home or in somewhere. And when I was finishing up in 2020, we saw such an increase in harmful sexualized behaviours in kids in the schoolyard, in their homes, that we were like, what is causing all of this harmful sexualized behaviour? Surely they're not all being sexually abused. And what actually was a lot of the times when we went and investigated and we couldn't find a source, or like we couldn't find out that they hadn't been harmed by someone, it was because of pornography and access to inappropriate content online. So that is definitely a factor. And I think, and I'm going to throw it out here, and I think I said this last week, Roblox is one of the contributing factors to that because of the sexualized content on it.
Kristi, just before you move on, you were touching on this before, but the issue around where the abuse comes from. I think there's always been a lot of talk about the predators are not known, but the data says different about it's often someone who's known to the family very intimately and stuff, and that's one of the myths.
Correct. Yeah, that is a massive myth. Yeah. And I think it's, the stranger danger messaging that happened in the late 80s, early 90s. There was an ad, I think, if anyone can remember that ad. There was a stranger danger ad that ran for 8 days about the white van and don't accepting lollies from some. It only ran for 8 days, and that messaging is still very strong. Parents, when we do talk to our kids, and I will bring this up at the end, when we do talk to kids about strangers, we really need to change that language to tricky people, tricky behaviours, because there is safe strangers out there. There are people that protect kids and will look after kids, So we need to make sure that we are, setting boundaries, keeping our language consistent, and tricky people and tricky behaviours. Tricky behaviours are something that makes you feel unsafe. You're not allowed you've got to keep a secret. You're not allowed to tell anyone, like all of these things that we would expect someone to use when they're grooming a child. And sadly, only 1 in 3 adults believe a child when they disclose abuse. Around 95% of all child sexual abuse disclosed is I should reverse that, less than 5% of child sexual abuse disclosures are false. And when they are false, it is because someone else has coached the child. Children generally don't disclose, especially the younger they get, the more likely it is real. And we know that the actual recantation, I was on a webinar just recently with a US researcher and an Australian researcher talking about when children disclose abuse and then they recant or they withdraw their disclosure, it's usually because, first of all, the disclosure is correct, but they've recanted it because they haven't had any support from their family or from their networks, and they recant it because they're scared of the perpetrator. So the research shows that less than 5% of it is recantation of it, or a withdrawal of it is actually because it's not true. So yeah, only 1 in 3 adults believe a child when they disclose abuse, and that stat's not good enough, really. In my opinion and in my experience, children very rarely lie about this stuff. So 3 types of predators that we have, and I should have put the QR code here. I have a podcast called Conversations with Kristi, and I interviewed a criminologist about this last year, and she shared a lot of this with me. So 3 types of predators: pedophilic or predatory. They're called predatory in the research. So they're mostly attracted to children. They very rarely are able to sustain a relationship with adults, and in the research it shows that most likely to abuse boys. So around 97% of them, the true, what we consider pedophilic, and that classic pedophile that we think of, is 97% of the time they'll abuse boys. And that was the biggest shock I got when I went into the child abuse squad, is that how many boys actually get abused and how little we actually think about that or talk about it. The next one is opportunistic. They're attracted to both adults and children. This is the classic offender that I saw, where they had a relationship, they had kids, and they would abuse children around them. I often saw them, they were, had relationships and were very good at maintaining their job. They were very charismatic. They might not abuse little children, but then when they got to tweens, they started abusing their own children or other children. They kind of have a profile, but it's individual to them. And then situational, I liken those offenders to when they go and break into a home, or they're there to rob the place, and then they sexually abuse the victim inside the home. Situational offenders, I saw these as they don't usually have an attraction to children at all, but in the right circumstances. And when I say circumstances, they're usually when they've lost their job or they've lost their relationship, or they feel out of control in their life, and then they abuse a child for power and control. So all of these do have some element of power and control over them, but their motivations are all different, and how they get to where they are is all different. The grooming process, so obviously finding and I say obviously, but to me it's obvious, but they find a vulnerable child and family. Usually the parents and the adults are being groomed along with the child. They build trust with the parent, show interest in the child. They love bomb the child. They love bomb. Sometimes they'll love bomb the parents, especially if something big's going on. I saw a lot of children being abused when the parents were going through either a health problem, like, one of the parents is going through cancer, or someone's passed away, or there's, a relationship breakdown. So this person will step in and build trust with both the parent and the child. They'll essentially make the child feel that they can trust them, that they can share things with them, and they'll build a wedge between the parent and the child. So if the parent and the child have a close relationship, they'll build a wedge between the two. And how they do that is that they will hide things from the parent. So they'll ask the child, they'll give them things like, gifts, show them pornography, depending on the age. They will talk about things that they wouldn't be allowed to do. They let them swear and stuff like that. They let them get away with things that maybe they wouldn't be able to do with their parent. And then so the child then knows, oh, well, I can't actually tell my parent because I'll get in trouble. They'll get in trouble. And then and on the flip side of that, they groom the parent and prepare the parent so that they won't trust their child. So they might manufacture it or orchestrate an issue with the child, like, oh yeah, they've really been playing up at school, or they've been playing up there. They need a mentor right now. Look, you're so busy. Let me help you mentor them, and look, I'll look after them. But I did notice they lied recently, like they've been telling a lot of white lies. So when if that child ever comes to the parent's sort of already coached in a way to not believe the child and what they're saying, because this person would never do that, right? So they get them alone. So they encourage the child to spend time alone with them, isolating them, testing them with touches and sexualized contact. So it's always a key, and I will go through some red flags in a minute, but it's always a thing about when a child seeks contact versus an adult seeks contact. If the adult is touching the child, and again, it can be a grooming thing. They can be groomed to seek out contact and touch. But, you know, sometimes I've seen or witnessed, you know, where a child goes to the adult and is happy to engage in contact, whereas the adult is the one engaging the contact, and especially with little kids. And then once they sexualize and abuse the child, they maintain control through manipulation, coercion, threats, to keep the child compliant and the secrets safe. So it's a complicated process, and it depends on the child whether it's actually very fast or slow. It depends on the family. If the family is very trusting or has never been exposed to any of this stuff and is just allowing like someone in their life, and it could be a relative, so there's already that inbuilt trust into the family. So it can be really quick or slow depending on the family. Or I will say this, or if the family, you know, if it's a relative, then they also have the other thing is that they just already have that inbuilt trust in that person. And sometimes, like I said, they don't abuse a child until they reach a certain age. So since nothing might have happened while they were, you know, up to a certain age, and then they hit the age that they actually feel attracted to them. So just this next video just is about an actual sex offender talking about what he did.
Alone.
Grooming. I would check out their family situation. I would check out their clothing to see how well they were, you know, financially. I would check out their social interaction with other kids. You know, when we were on the ballparks or on the gym floor, you know, I would make sure which ones I wanted to molest. I would give them special attention, congratulate them, talk to them when I know that I would never be allowed to talk to anybody else. You know, aside from everybody, I would give them the attention that an official is not supposed to give anybody. And it made them feel like, wow, he's paying me attention. You know, it is a direct form of grooming.
Were there certain characteristics that you looked for in children before molesting them?
In children, yes, but more I also looked at their families. If I thought the father was a threat, I would not approach the child. If I thought that the child had friends that he would tell, I would not approach him. If I thought the child had friends that were in the same capacity he was, I would approach him. For the simple fact that if I could molest him, I could lure him into believing, grooming him into believing that he would enjoy it. And therefore, I could manipulate him into having his other friends come and be molested by me as well.
So perhaps a child that doesn't really have a whole lot of friends, maybe not really a strong family, things like that.
Yes, no spiritual values, weak in education, you know, needs help in many ways, even from split parenting, you know, has a mother who may be having problems with the family, you know, well, here comes superhero in to help out, you know, wow, well, thank you very much. No problem. You ever need me to take them away for the night so you can have a night out? No problem. It works.
And I know that everyone's probably freaked out about that, but that is probably the best way to explain how they think and how they work. Now, just so you know that not last year, the year before, 2024, gosh, this year's going so fast. There was a research project done by the university, the Institute of Criminology, and I think it was University of New South Wales. A couple of universities joined together, and they found that the research project and the study was done with anonymous male participants, and the research is there on the QR code if you like reading research. But basically they interviewed all of these anonymous participants via a survey, and the research showed that 1 in 6 Australian men, if no one ever found out, this is how the questions were posed to these participants. If no one was to find out, would you sexually abuse a child? And they went through the age groups till they went down all the way down, and they said yes or no to whether they would sexually abuse a child or not. Are they attracted? And it showed that in the combined stats that 1 in 6 Australian men showed feelings towards, or had feelings towards, sexual feelings towards children and teens. I guess when we talk about children, we know that they're children until they're 18 years old. So it's a very broad group of things. But one of the things that they did do is 1 in 10 acknowledged they had committed a child sex offence regardless of being caught. And 1 in 20 had sexual feelings towards children and admitted to offending. And probably the more concerning part to this, and it's stuff that I knew and I already knew, but most of the men that had sexually offended and were attracted to children were more likely to be married, had strong social networks. We're not talking about loners and people who don't have friends. They consumed pornography at higher rates. They were 3 times more likely to work with children. And I call them career sex offenders because they've based their career around being close to children. And we know that and I know that from my experience in investigating. They're 11 times and earn higher incomes. When I say earn higher incomes, over $150,000 a year. So we're not talking about, when you think pedophile, the word pedophile, it's not people who are in a white van giving away lollies in a trench coat splashing kids. It's people who have jobs, people who are everyday citizens that go to work, they go home, but they're 11 times more likely to watch violent pornography. And I truly believe that current pornography is actually grooming sex offenders into child sex offenders. So yeah, and one of the other things is that they found that the people who admitted to it, they also found that they had twice the rate of ACEs, which is adverse childhood experiences. So they were either sexually abused themselves, domestic violence, physical violence, neglect, and emotional and psychological abuse. So all of these have a factor in this. But, I will say this, 1 in 6 Australian men reported to have sexual feelings towards children, and 1 in 10 acknowledged committing sexual offences. Well, 9 out of 10 didn't, and 1 in 5 and 5 out of 6 didn't and don't. So, it's not all bad.
Kristi, there was just a question there before you moved on about sample sizes for these stats and whether you're comfortable that our sample size gets enough data.
It's the most difficult samples. I mean, it was over 1,500 participants, and I spoke to the researcher about it, and I said, how did you qualify these? And how do you know that they weren't lying? How do you know that they weren't, etc. Now, because it was an anonymous research, and they did actually have more participants but they disqualified them because they had lots and lots, like the survey was massive. The fact that they even got the amount that they had was quite interesting. There was no risk of ever being identified. So I think that also that anonymity was actually very helpful. You'd have to go into the research and have a look. More research needs to be done in this area. The fact is that we don't have enough support services. One of the interesting parts of that research was the ages of the ones that had actually reported offending versus the ones that had reported having sexual feelings. The ones that were more likely to have already offended were over the age of 40. The ones that were reporting sexual feelings, but also there was a tick box or some sort of question about would you seek help or would you like help if you weren't to be found charged with anything, were under 40. So we're looking at, the 20 to 30-year-old participants were saying, yes, I recognize I have sexual feelings towards children. I would like help for it. And then the ones that said, yes, I had offended against children, that 1 in 10 said I had, and they were over the age of 40. So it's almost like, and that's why I said I think pornography today is actually grooming, potentially helping in grooming child sex offences, is because we do know that when someone watches child sexual abuse material, they've got a 50% increase in going out and seeking a child to spend time with. So it's there's a lot there's a lot to unpack in all of that. I don't know if I answered that. Who is most at risk? So again, same as what we talked about last week, is that vulnerable children living with a disability are 3 times more likely to be sexually abused, and children with poor mental health. So poor mental health goes in hand with low self-esteem, lack of confidence, and lack of friends in real life. So if someone comes in and they're grooming a child and they're their best friend and they're giving them a place to listen, and they're not, they're basically becoming their confidant and building them up. A friend of mine, Glenn Fisher, who's he was abused in King's Cross as a homeless boy in his teens and early teens. He said that his abusers, and he had multiple, would say things like, "You're so smart, you're so intelligent. Look how all of the kids, they look up to you," and they built him up, but then they would abuse him. So that's quite often what happens there. And any family where you're struggling with time and to have regular conversations, and you haven't talked to your kids about, you don't have open communication, they're at risk. So red flags of unsafe adults, in my mind, some of these are some of the things I've seen. When an adult dismisses a child's body safety rules, so dismisses their autonomy altogether and their boundaries, initiating touching, I've already talked about. Spends time with children behind locked doors or closed doors, or where other adults and people can't see them. A lot of abuse obviously happens behind a locked door or closed doors. I'm thinking more like in the bedrooms or bathrooms, things like that. Secretive over phones and devices, computers, and befriends children on social media. When I was a netball coach, and I talked about this last week, I think, when I was a netball coach for my daughter's netball, if I needed to converse with kids, the parents were always in that group. I didn't have any social media. I never befriended or had them as friends on any social media, and still don't until they're 18. And I also didn't, if I needed to talk to kids, they were in a group with adults, in parents, so everyone knew what was being said and happening. It's really, I think in this day and age where we really need to set boundaries around social media, because it gets very grey. And I bring this up because I also have seen a lot of sex offenders, especially in early childhood education and education, where they find ways to get into toileting areas or when children are bathing or whatever. So it's really important that we pay attention to who's hanging around or loitering, and how they behave around kids, offering kids favors, taking on special trips, not including everyone, sleepovers and babysitting and stuff like that, and also becoming really strong friends with parents. The other thing about it is that red flags for me when it comes to parents is any parent who refuses assistance on behalf of a child. For instance, one of the things I saw a lot of sex offenders do when they were abusing their own children was not allow them to have any kind of counselling, support services or medical services, because they were scared that if that child got support that they would actually disclose. They would refuse any kind of school counselling or counselling. They would also diminish their children's diagnoses and feelings and emotions. They weren't allowed to have them. So anyone that's really not listening to kids and giving them the support they need, they're really friendly and over smooth. Like I'm always, people are nice, but you don't need to be nice all the time. And an FBI profiler I really like said, if anyone wants to spend more time with your kid than you do, then that's a red flag. So these are some of the things: belittling or putting down children to discredit them to other adults or safe people. And that's one way that they groom other adults, so that if the child does ever come to you, then no one will believe them. I'm going to skip that video, but I will give you the link to put in there, Maddie, for when you send it out. But this is just a quick video about behavioural signs and after they've been abused. So some of the behavioural signs that we see is a 180 change in behaviour. And the thing is that when we behaviourally, I'm not even saying that word properly, sorry guys, but when the child, we can't always tell. And I have spoken to victim survivors where they were basically the worst behaved kids in class, and they were screaming out for help and no one asked them what was going on. And quite often kids won't say unless they feel safe anyway, and I will share that in a minute. So lots of risk taking, self-harming, school refusal, PTSD and but also things like withdrawing from their friendship groups or fear of things that don't make sense or seem irrational. But one of the things that also kids will show is that they will do a complete 180 the other way. So if they're if you know, all of a sudden they're showing that they became they've gone from really quite disruptive, and then all of a sudden become really the best student, the best at like they're really trying hard. It could be that because they can't control what's happening at home, they decide that they need to try and control everything outside of the home. So they become quite controlling. And I saw it in especially younger children, 7, 8, 9-year-olds, where they are bossing everyone around. Not saying that that's an indicator on its own if there's not other stuff, but, you know, they became really bossy, really controlling, because they can't control what's happening in their home or in their abuse. So they try and control everything else. So what can we do, or what we can do? You're already learning about child sexual abuse so that you can have a better outlook and help with your immediate communities. In small community, I don't know about you guys, but when I was growing up in a small town, it would be like, don't go near that house. There, you know, your parents would say, don't go to that house, and you're not going to stay at that person's home. And that was how but they didn't talk to us about it. You know, we didn't understand why. We just weren't allowed to go there. But, you know, predatory behaviors and abusive behaviors that love bombing, coercive control, and unhealthy relationships, they're really important for yourself to know what it looks like so that you can teach it or talk about it with young people. Body safety education, obviously there's curriculum in schools, but to really understand body safety, it's really best that you understand that body safety is you have the right to feel safe at all times. Everyone has the right to feel safe at all times. And you can talk with someone about anything. And if we live by those 2 rules, then we can help kids understand them. And I will talk more about body safety in a sec. You know, be mindful who we trust with our kids, and that's both adults and children. I talk about sleepovers. There are massive sleepovers, and camps are probably some of the, and I know that, you know, school camps seem like a passage of childhood. But I sometimes wonder if, you know, if we don't have the right mindset around all of these activities, and we're not, if we're just trusting anyone. I always get really confused by parents who just drop their kids off without knowing the other parents. Because, you know, you think about a school setting, if you're not in a small town and you don't know everyone in your small town, and you're just dropping kids off at someone's house because they know them at school, you just don't know what's going on in that home. And we know that over 90% of child sexual abuse is by someone known to the child. And obviously we need to always listen and believe children. Whether it's not our job as adults, when a child discloses to us, it is an honor and they feel safe with us, and that's why they're telling us. So it's our job to take that seriously and do something with that, and it's not our job to decide whether that actually happened or not. It's obviously police's job, police and child protection's job. So one of the interesting things that I found out last year was that there was a survey in 2019 of child sex offenders in prison, in a Queensland prison, and they identified 2 things. They were asked the question, why did you not abuse a child? Or it was framed in a proper statement, but basically, what stopped you from abusing a child even though you had already groomed them, etc.? Or what stopped you abusing? And 84% of it was non-compliance of the child, and 16% was the protective parent. So non-compliance of a child means that they have said no, that they knew what was going on, they called out the adult, they ran away, they didn't go along with the grooming behaviours, they didn't they weren't easily led by the groomer or the abuser. And then obviously 16% was a protective parent, in that the protective parent stepped in and said, no, that's not happening. You're not taking my child. You're not allowed to go for a sleepover, etc. So that was pretty for me when I learned that this research existed. I was pretty impressed by it, because that's what I knew. I knew that if kids knew that they were what grooming behaviours were, what those tricky behaviours were, and that you kept a close relationship with your child, you talked about things, and you had that open, honest communication with the child, then you're more likely, your child's less likely to actually be sexually abused. And last year, my daughter was in year 11, and she came home one day, 3/4 of the way through the year, and said, Mum, the girls have been talking to me. And she was in a group of 6 girls at the time. And she said, I'm the only one who hasn't been sexually abused. And that's quite high. The fact that she was 1 in 6 was the only one who hadn't been abused. But this is the thing, like, I have been having these conversations. I haven't talked about abuse the whole time. I haven't worded it as abuse, but I talked to her from a very young age, from 2 and 3 years old, about body safety. And she knew her body safety rights, and she knew that I would always listen to her. So body safety chats, if you haven't taught or know about body safety, it's teaching kids they have the right to feel safe at all times, and they can speak with someone about anything. Now, that could be you as an educator. You could be the person kids come to because they feel safe with you. And that would be my biggest goal as an educator. In fact, I get a bit emotional when I think about some of the educators I had in my own life, because I didn't have a safe home life. And I was able to go to some of my home ec teacher especially was an amazing woman who I could always talk to about stuff and share stuff with her. So that might be you. So knowing about early warning signs, one of the things, if you haven't heard the terminology, it's what does it feel like in your body, that gut reaction and gut feeling. We talk about it being intuition, but kids actually feel it physically. We all feel it physically, but most of us ignore it. So when we want kids to understand how, when they feel safe and unsafe, one of the things that they can learn about is, hey, what does it feel like when you feel safe in your body? And my daughter, when she was little, at 3 years old, she would say, well, it feels like I'm warm and I'm getting a hug and my heart feels big. And then I would say, well, what does it feel like in your body when you feel unsafe? And I used to ask these same questions to kids who had been sexually, like I had done a specialist child interview with after the fact, and I would teach them about early warning signs. And they would say things like, my knees get shaky, I get sweaty hands, my hair stands on end, I feel sick in the tummy, I get a headache. So when we know what those early warning signs are, kids can understand that that's my like safety mechanism. That's my body telling me this is an unsafe situation or this is an unsafe person. And then we teach them about what to do next. So the next step to that would be to teach them who's a safe person in their network. Sadly, when I was interviewing kids, I had kids who would name their family dog because they didn't have one safe adult. So you quite often when we do this with kids, they'll name a teacher or an educator or their school counselor or someone in their network that they can talk to because they know that that person will listen to them. And that person makes them feel safe, believes them, and is someone they can contact and should be an adult. And I talked about secrets and surprises. Safe secrets are safe secrets or surprises are, you know, they're safe. They don't make your early warning signs go off. You can tell them about it. You have control over the secret, and there's no time, and there's a time limit. It will end. Whereas unsafe secrets or secrets are unsafe. They make you early warning signs. They make you feel unsafe or uncomfortable. You can't tell anyone. There's no control and there's no time limit. This is a secret forever. So teaching kids, especially little kids, but even teenagers about this stuff. I know I had a situation with my own teenager a while ago where she wanted to go on a sleepover at her boyfriend's farm. And I was like, no, my early warning signs are going off. It was when I didn't know them very well, that it was over 100 kilometers away. I was like, no. And when I went to her, I said, look, I know you really want to go, but my early warning signs are going off. And she was upset at the time, but then she came back to me. She goes, you know what? I actually didn't want to go, but I felt pressured to go. So I'm glad that you said that, Mum. And so that's how we can talk about that with kids. So a child won't disclose to anyone without feeling safe first. I'm just checking time. And that the reason for that is obviously grooming, but also the fact is kids will try and take as much on their shoulders as they possibly can. If their abuser is someone in their home and that person is influential in their lives, or that someone they love, they're less likely to disclose. And I saw that a lot. They are, if they don't have safe people to support them, if they're fearful of the repercussions to their family, or they're scared of something happening to their other family members. I did have a lot of kids, and even now adult survivors say, they were threatened with abuse happening to their siblings, that they would be killed, that their pets would be killed by the abuser, and that can put a big burden on kids' shoulders. So the fact is when a child tells you something like this, it is, like I said, it is an honor because you are someone that they are entrusting with this information to help them. They don't tell you because they need you. So they don't tell you because they're trying to get someone in trouble. So, it's really important that we take it seriously. As an adult and as a parent and as an educator, we need to make sure that we are always a safe adult around children. You know, we don't ask kids to keep secrets. I used to get really pissed, and I'm going to, and no offense to any grandparents that are listening, but I used to get really pissed when my mother-in-law would say, here's a lolly, don't tell your mum. And I would be like, you're literally grooming my child to not tell me things when she needs to tell me things. Like, the thing is that if we want our kids and our grandkids and all of the children to be safe, we never ask them to keep any secrets. We don't guilt them into like, hey, if you love me, you give me a hug. If you'll do it if you make me happy. Definitely no friends on social media. We don't single out one child over another. We call out inappropriate behaviours and jokes by all people, not just adults. We don't make children feel unsafe, and we always respect no. And that was one thing that was really, again, something that I had to teach my in-laws, is because, you know, there would be tickling and roughhousing, and my daughter would be saying, stop, stop, stop. And they continued, and I would be like, no, we need to listen to, and she was only little back then, we need to listen, because if we don't respect their no, they're not going to think that it's okay for them to say no to other adults, because no one in their lives are respecting their no. And one of the things that I wanted to make mention, and I don't always bring this up, is that your observations matter and your notes matter. So one of the things that I'll quickly tell you this story is when I was a detective in a city centre, and I was on a completely different job. It was a burglary, stealing. Someone basically backed their truck up to a brand new house with brand new furniture and stole everything out of it. And I mean everything. There was nothing left whilst that family was at work. And we found it suburbs away. Anyway, when I went to do the search warrant and get some of the items back, they'd sold a lot, but went to get some of the stuff back, I noticed some really weird things in the house. And some of the things that were really weird was that they had children living there. There was multiple adults living there, but they had children living there, but they didn't have a bedroom set up. Like, there wasn't kids' bedroom set up. Anyway, you probably wouldn't ever come across that, hopefully, but it was a really weird setting. Anyway, I actually put in a report to Child Protection, because there was other things, like there was tripods set up and there was other things which didn't make sense at the time. But about 18 months later, after I'd charged and gone through everything, my stuff was all sorted, but I'd already made notes about things and it just wasn't right. Put in the report to Child Protection. I get called by the Child Abuse Squad. I'd moved into another centre, and they said, have you still got that search warrant, all your notes on this search warrant? I said, yes, why? And they were like, well, your report actually went to Child Protection. Child Protection went and did some visits. They actually removed the children, and now we've found that the children didn't report anything or disclose anything, but they found there was videos found of these children being sexually abused. Now, the children had been moved 12 months out of that house, 12 months before anything had ever been found. But the thing is that what my notes mattered, your notes and what you observe matters. And one of the things I will say is that even if in the moment you think, oh, I don't think anything, I don't know, it's just giving your gut feeling. If you make notes for those kids and even if it's just in a file or something that doesn't ever go anywhere, when an investigator comes to you in 10 years' time, that you will help that child immensely. So just be mindful of that. And I don't want to harp on about that too much more. But that's me done in a nutshell. Next week, we're doing we're going to answer all of the questions that we can't answer right now, plus others from last week, plus go through, we've got VicPol, Ben McCauley from VicPol coming in to answer questions as well. So hopefully we'll see you in next week's session. But if you've got any questions now that are quick and easy, like you did before, that would be cool. And I'll stop sharing screen.
Kristi, just a quick question from your body safety chats.
Yeah.
Always in schools, I guess, in particular, about when is the right time to introduce these types of conversations and have them. Have you got some, I know we can probably go into this next week, but have you got some guidelines, particularly around that topic of discussion?
Can I just ask, is it for like when the school handles those conversations or when a parent handles those conversations?
I was thinking because our audience is mainly schools. I was just wondering from a school's perspective, if they're involved in that, when might be the right time to start those types of conversations?
My answer is now and always. I don't think that there's a right or wrong time. It's just having them, and it's a constant. It's not a one and done conversation, unfortunately, and kids all learn in different ways too. I have parents who have bought some of my resources where they like, oh, my child doesn't want to talk to me about it, and I'm like, how does your child learn? So it's not just sitting in front. Like from my experience, sometimes kids are kinesthetic learners where they need to do things. So it might be kicking a ball, like literally kicking a ball, or having a, like, you know, what could kids do if this happens? What could, you know, or it could be reading a book to little kids, or it could be an online activity, or a whatever. So I think it's really important that, first of all, not all children learn through having a conversation. My daughter was a chatty Cathy, and obviously I'm a chatty Cathy, so we couldn't shut each other up and we'd talk about this stuff all day. But yeah, I think it's really important to try and reach them from all different ways in this space, and do it whenever you can. Add it into add it into your conversations if it comes up in a teachable moment.
And I know we're running out of time. There's just a last question in the chat box if you wanted to quickly address that. What if you and other staff members have suspicions because of student behaviours but have no proof in that space? What would be the next step for a staff member?
I mean, Ben can probably go through some of this stuff next week as well, because he's going to talk about this. But you don't need proof to put a mandatory report in. All you need is suspicion. So, and one of the things you need to remember is it's not your job to make to investigate or to make the decision whether something's happened or not. It's just, so if you've got enough suspicion to think that something's happened, and there's enough suspicion there to go, something's going on in this family or this child's life, it is our mandatory duty to actually report it, and that's all you need, suspicion.
Yep, better to be safe than sorry, and particularly in such a serious matter. On that note, Kristi, you've done amazing to squeeze so much into just on an hour, and amazing content, really lots of stuff there, as you mentioned, some Q&A next week and what to do, and Ben will be joining us from the police. So on that note, you can take a break now, and thank you, and I'll hand over to Brendan.
Thank you.
I think you might be on mute, Brendan.
Yes.
Can you? How's that?
You're right, Brendan.
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you for the session, Kristi. As a grandfather, I enjoy giving sweets and treats to my grandchildren. And every time I give them sweets, I tell them not to tell their mother.
Don't do that anymore, Brendan.
No, I'm going to stop doing that. A big learning today.
Excellent outcome.
Yes. As you've already mentioned, the third session next Wednesday, a what to do session. This discussion will include options for discussing these rather difficult topics in the local communities, setting up expectations around child safety in schools and community groups, how to be a safe adult. And as you've also mentioned, this will include a Q&A and problem-solving segment. So I would encourage everybody to tune in again next week. The survey, the poll for the day, is in the chat box. So everybody, please complete the survey before you sign off on today's segment. Thank you to all the participants today. Bye for now.